When did you get interested in flying?
I think probably my interest peaked when Lindbergh crossed the ocean in 1927. And when he did that, I talked to my dad and I said, you know, I'd like to be a pilot. And he said, well, let's work on that. And I took flying lessons at Boeing Field. A fellow by the name of Dale McAdams taught me to fly. A nice guy. I sold it in 8 hours and 5 minutes. And you had needed to have a minimum or a maximum of 8 hours. And I had 8 hours and 5 minutes in a Piper Cub. I've got to build up my flying time, and it was too expensive to rent airplanes. So I bought an interest in the Piper Cub and started building up my flying time. My objective at that time was to become a pilot with United Airlines. And of course I was a long ways from having enough flying time, but that was my aim. By the time I got up to maybe 150 hours, 140 hours, the war was beginning to heat up in England, and there was an outfit canvassing the United States looking for young guys like me. I was 18, 19. And they recruited me to go over to England and fly Spitfires. Well, I didn't think I had enough experience and talent to go fly a Spitfire, so I went up to Canada. Went through their training program, and it was a good program. It lasted about 5 or 6 months. Ended up with my wings, and then I thought I was going to go over to England, but they decided I should be a flight instructor. So I went through flight instructor schools, which took about another 3 months, and then I was assigned to RCAF base to be an instructor on Harvard, which is the equivalent of the AT-6 that the United States cadets used in their training program. They call it the Harvard, same. And then I got anxious about getting over to England, so I volunteered to go over to England and went over on the Queen Elizabeth with a bunch of other guys and a bunch of girls, and for about 4 or 5 days we chased girls. Never caught any. They were well chaperoned. When I got over to England, I thought I was going to go on to Spitfires, but the powers that be decided I'd make a good bomber pilot. So the RAF was building up their bomber capability at that time, so they sent me to a transition school where I flew the Airspeed Oxford, which is a little twin-engine trainer, and that was good training. And we got used to flying in the UK, and that was the whole experience, because there were airports all over the place, and it was blacked out at that time. That was 1941. So I went through the transition school, and I thought I'd go on to Halifax or one of those airplanes, but they put me on the Wellington, which is, they called the Wimpy, after J. Wellington Wimpy, the cartoon character. And it was a good airplane. It was a crew of 5, twin engine, geodetic construction. It had fabric covered, and you could get hit, make a hole. That's all it would do. It was very strong. We had a crew of 5. It was a single pilot operation. I was the one pilot, and I had a bomb aimer who rode up in the nose, had a navigator rode behind me, a wireless operator behind me, and a tail gunner. So the 5 of us flew together. I must have flown them, maybe 30, 40 hours in the Wellington with my crew. And we did simulated bombing. and engine out performance, and had a check ride with the guy. And at the end of about 3 months of training, they sent me to the squadron.
So, when they sent you to the squadron, was the squadron already deployed to Italy, or was it still in the UK?
No, I was in Italy.
It was in Italy.
Yeah.
So how did you and your crew get down to Italy?
We flew down. We left Land's End at the tip of the UK. Flew low level because the German fighter airplanes would check up high. But we went down about 200 or 300 feet above the water, and landed in Fez, Morocco.
So you went nonstop from Land's End to Morocco?
Yeah.
Wow. And your navigator did a good job.
Yeah, he got us there.
So, can you tell me what a typical mission would have been like?
Well, typical, we'd be forewarned in the daytime that they'd have a meeting with the group captain. His name was Powell, Speedy Powell, and he would brief us on the mission. And he was really quite a guy. He was fearless. He would take a crew and replace the pilot and take it himself every once in a while. He took my crew one time, and my crew said, "We'll never go with him again." He was fearless. He didn't do any evasive action. He just go right through. Whereas I was evading all over the place. We had the mission briefing in the afternoon, and we'd have a time for takeoff, and we'd have to be at our airplane at, say, 6 o'clock or some time just before dark. And we were told to be at that briefing with our target. And one time we were supposed to be over the target and what altitude. And then my navigator and bombardier would get together and make sure they had all the details. And because I was just the chauffeur, just flew the airplane. So we'd go up into Italy or Sicily or Germany, wherever it was, and drop our bombs and come home. That was, and usually your daytime started about 2 o'clock in the afternoon when you'd have a briefing. Then you'd go back to your tent or wherever you were, and then at takeoff time you'd be in the airplane ready to go.
You said there were times when it was pretty scary.
Yeah, well, the ground accuracy from the guns on the ground got pretty good, and they would fire their cannons from the ground, and they were timed to explode at a certain altitude, and you could hear them explode unless you hit them. The shrapnel might make a hole in your airplane. Unless they actually hit you, you could feel the concussion of the bombs exploding. But other than that, it was no big deal.
And did your aircraft ever have any battle damage?
Yeah, you got holes in it. Yeah.
But nothing vital.
Well, I lost an engine one time where the engine quit. But no.
When the engine quit, were you able to make it back to Tunisia?
Yes.
So the Hercules was a pretty good engine.
It was a great engine, yeah. I never had any concerns with it.
You said you had to make a crash landing one time.
Yeah, well,
what
that
were
was
the circumstances?
That was because I ran out of fuel, and I'd been hit, not in the fuel tank, but one of the lines was hit by flak, and the fuel drained out through that line. So I ran out of fuel at night, and I knew it was going to happen because I could see the gauge going down. But it was a surprise when all of a sudden both engines quit.
It's pretty quiet.
Yeah. But fortunately, I was over friendly territory, and I landed in the forest in a bunch of trees, which took the shock of the landing. We could have bailed out. In fact, I told my crew when this happened, I said, if you guys want to bail out, you could do it. Otherwise, stick around. I'm going to stay with the airplane. So they all stayed, and we made a forced landing. Nobody got really badly hurt, just shook up a little bit.
Were you ever coned by the searchlights?
Oh, sure. Yeah. On my very first mission, I had a guy by the name of Mickey Mortimer, who was a Royal Air Force pilot, sergeant pilot. And I thought after that ride, I thought my days of flying were numbered. We got coned by searchlights over Germany. And oh, Mickey, you did a great job. The cockpit was just like daylight. It was the master light got on us, then about 25, 30 other searchlight goes on. Then all the flak came up. We got all through with that, and he managed to get us through it. We got hit several times, but nothing serious. And there was no co-pilot in that airplane. There was just a jump seat, came out of the side, the fuselage. I was sitting there, hanging on. And he said, sir, because I was an officer, he was a sergeant pilot. He said, you were really cool doing that thing, you didn't say a word. I said, Mickey, I was so damn scared I couldn't talk.
Well, I imagine you must have felt rather helpless.
Yeah, yeah.
Because you can't do anything.
You couldn't do anything but hang on. So, but that was my first mission. And when that happened, I thought, boy, I sure got into the wrong area when I got into bombers. But I never had anything as bad as that again.
That was the worst one as far as the searchlight. Do you have any recollections of being intercepted by German night fighters?
Yeah. And we managed to get rid of them by taking evasive action.
And when you say evasive action, what would that mean?
Well, my tail gunner would tell me, he'd say, the night fighter after make a diving turn. So I'd go, and then hopefully get away from it.
What about clouds? Were you able to use those at all to?
Well, if you did, it was kind of accidental.
Yeah. And that brings up another question. How much of a problem was the weather?
Well, when you ran across weather, it was a problem. Because we didn't have really any sophisticated navigation. The navigator had to take a sextant shot. And when we got into real bad weather, you depended on dead reckoning and then radar when you got near your home base to get into your airport. We flew together for 40 missions on the welding bomber. We had some that were pretty bad. By bad, I mean they were kind of scary. Some that were kind of easy. We got hit one time where we had to make a crash landing, and we ended up in a bunch of trees on the ground, and nobody got hurt. Shook up a little bit.
So after 40 missions, you've filled a lot of squares, haven't you?
Yeah.
And I understand you received a DFC from the Royal Air Force.
I did.
And was that for any particular mission or just cumulative?
I think it was just I don't remember what the citation says, but I think it was just because I did the 40 missions.
You were a survivor.
Yeah.
So you now have the opportunity to transfer to the Army Air Forces. And I understand that at one point you had an interview with General Doolittle.
With who?
With General Doolittle?
Oh, yes.
How did that come about?
Well, he was the general in charge of the 12th Air Force. That's the one, as an RAF pilot, we were flying under his command. So when I made the transfer, he was the one that approved it. And he's the one that put me into night fighters, because I he interviewed me because it was under his command, and asked me what I'd like to do. I said I didn't want to go on B-17s because that's what they had, and he said, "Well, what do you want to do?" I said, "I want to go on night fighters."
So you actually asked for night fighters?
Oh yeah. Oh. I felt that was a pretty safe way to go.
Oh. Yeah.
And when we came back to the States, they asked me what I prefer to do, or they asked me would I survive some more combat. I said sure, why not? And so they sent me back to England, and only this time I went back as a night fighter pilot, which was much better, because the night fighter, you're a shooter, regardless of the fact that somebody was shooting at you, you became the aggressor. So I flew night. Excuse me. I ended up flying in transition, the A-20, just to get into night fighter training, and then I went to the Bullfighter, which is a British night fighter. And good airplane, had good for about 400 knots speed, and had 4 cannons and 4 machine guns, crew of 2, and I managed to find a radar operator whose pilot had been washed out of the program, so he was adrift, and so he came with me, and we went through the transition together. His name was Lefty, or John Rudolfsky. He's from New York. We went back to Italy after our training in the States, and then joined the 414th Night Fighter Squadron in Pontedera, Italy, where we were doing interception of German airplanes that came into the airspace, and also we were assigned to do what they call intruder missions, where we would go out and follow the Autobahn or the main highways and look for locomotives with the idea of destroying anything that was moving on the ground. And we ended up with the Bullfighter until the Black Widow came along. That's a P51 made by Northrop, and it was quite a good change because it was a tricycle gear, whereas the Black Widow was a tail dragger, and it had powerful engines. R2800 engines were developed, about 2,000 horsepower each, and had 4 cannons and 4 machine guns, and it was good for about maybe 6 hours of flying before you needed to get on the ground. We flew the Bullfighter for maybe 25 missions, and then got into the Black Widow and flew for another. Well, altogether 48 missions between the two, and we ended up did part of our flying out of Italy and part of our flying out of Belgium. And at that time, after the war was almost coming to an end, and we were sent into Germany, and we flew out of Germany for about another 3 or 4 months when the Germans surrendered, and we were on our way then to go to Guam. They were going to deploy my whole squadron to Guam. I was a captain by that time, and we were on our way when they dropped the atomic bomb. So instead of going to Guam, we came back to the States.
So what was your first mission like in Night Fighters?
Well, I don't remember exactly, but the way the mission went with the Night Fighters, you'd take off from wherever you were, and you would be assigned a sector to patrol. Then, if a German airplane came in there, the radar would vector you up to them, and then your radar would pick them up and take you. You'd identify them. you had to identify them because you didn't want to shoot down one of your own airplanes. So come up underneath and look up, make sure that you knew it was a German airplane, and then you'd back off and make an attack. Now, that was normal procedure.
So how did you get to know, or to what extent did you get to know the controllers on the ground? Could you recognize their voices?
Oh, yeah. And then I think they recognized mine, too.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. But it's kind of, you asked this question that raises a thought in my mind. When we did intruder missions where we'd go into Germany and shoot up trucks and trains and locomotives and stuff, and we'd be flying within Germany for maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours. And we weren't exactly sure where we were. We knew we were in Germany. And we'd pull up a little bit, call for a code name on it, steer, and the voice would come back on you with an English accent. You'd say, well, so-and-so, have you on my radar? Steer 270. Well, I knew that getting back to my base would more be like 230. So what they were, it was a German that intercepted my query. He was trying to run me out of fuel by putting me 30 degrees off the return course. So you'd recognize it and say, goodbye.
Were you briefed in your mission briefings about the possibility of this, the electronic intrusion?
Well, it was there all the time.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it was not a surprise.
No.
It was a common tactic.
No, you had to make sure that you believed you were getting the right, you knew about where you were, but not exactly.
So you make the transition from the Bullfighter to the P51, to the Black Widow. Did you go to England to become familiar with the airplane, or did you go to the States, or how did that transition take place?
It took place right in was it Italy? When you're talking about the Black Widow?
Yeah.
Going from the Bullfighter to the Black Widow. Took place right where we were on the airport. They flew the airplanes in, I guess it was in Italy, and got a cockpit check, got a manual, and said, read the manual, find out how to get the gear down if the normal system fails, and how to run the flaps, and that was it. One guy rode with me. He jumped in there, and there was a seat right behind the pilot, which a gunner would sit in if we had one, but we never had one. And we did one circuit, came in and landed. He said, "Go."
So you're overflying Germany now. What were your targets?
Well, it depended on where you were scheduled to go in a certain area to look for any German airplanes that came into that area, and you'd be under radar, so they would direct you. Then we had radar on board too, so if we were just orbit that sector that we were in, maybe 20-mile radius.
And what about strikes against transportation?
We did a lot of that. We would do about a couple of hours at altitude, waiting for any German airplanes. Then they'd release us to go down to low level. We'd go down to about 200 or 300 feet.
200 or 300 feet in the dark?
Yeah.
Wow.
And we'd shoot up anything that was on the scope, whether it was a railroad locomotive or a car or whatever.
So in those missions, did you ever carry bombs, or was it strictly straight?
No, we carried bombs.
You did carry bombs.
In fact, we used to carry, when I'd find the Black Widows, we had 2 500-pound bombs, one under each wing. And on one mission, I was sent out, I guess I was flying out of Belgium at that time, and the mechanism on the airplane didn't work correctly. And I dropped the bomb A bomb, and I thought I was dropping both of them. But one of them hung up, never went off until I landed. And when I landed, it fell off on the runway. But the sequence of this was the armorers had neglected to pull the safety pin from the bombs, both bombs. So the first bomb that I dropped on whatever that target was didn't explode.
Right.
And the second bomb that dropped off my airplane didn't explode. So in a way, his screw-up saved my life.
So earlier you talked about how much you enjoyed flying.
Yeah.
And for you, it wasn't a matter of, let's say, anger towards the Germans or the Italians.
No.
You wanted to fly.
Yeah.
So here you are now, you're flying combat missions. Did you ever feel uncomfortable about taking other people's lives?
I did. And I always have felt that when I shot down another airplane or destroyed a locomotive, I was hoping I didn't kill anybody. That I was eliminating the transportation.
Right. Yeah, you look at it as terms of the material impact rather than the personal impact.
I never had any hatred towards the Germans. They were doing their job and we were doing our job.
So the war's over,
Okay.
you're back in Seattle. You want to keep flying if you can.
Right.
How difficult was it to find a job?
Not very difficult. It flew out of the reserves for a while, and also got into the non-scheduled airline business. And that's probably what made it an easy transition. And the non-skeds were building up because of airplanes being available at a reasonable cost. They could fly or buy a DC-3 for maybe $10,000, $15,000, and a DC-4 for about maybe $20,000, and C-46 for about the same. Some of them even had fuel in them, so it was a pretty way to get started. But I flew with the non-skeds for about 10 years, and I made a good living. It was better than, say, being a storekeeper. And then I was, by the time after my last couple of years, I was flying for a company called Transocean Airlines, and I was flying from Europe to New York, back and forth. And I had a call on the radio to contact this fellow on the ground when I got on the ground about a job with Boeing. So I did, and they said, well, Boeing is looking for some experienced pilots, and I've given your name to them, and if you're willing, and when you get all set, call this number. So I called them and told them who I was, and they said, oh yeah, we've got you here, and from your background, looks like we could hire you. And I said, I'm ready.
What did they tell you? Did they give you any idea what you'd be working on?
Well, first of all, I went on the B-47 at Wichita.
Now, what kind of jet experience did you have at that point?
Very little, but I'd flown the T-33 as an Air Force reservist, but I didn't have a lot of jet experience, but they put me through a jet school in Wichita, and I flew as a co-pilot for a while. Then we got the B-52, and I checked out as captain, and I flew, I guess, out of Wichita. I flew that B-52 for maybe 6 years.
Yeah, you had probably as much B-52 time as anybody, I suppose.
Quite a bit, yeah.
How did you get involved in the low-level testing of the B-52?
Well, it was one of my assignments. Again, SAC decided that the only way they could get to the target was to go low level. And so I was, along with another guy, Chuck Fisher was the other pilot. We were assigned the idea of showing that the airplane could withstand flying at say 400 knots at a couple or 300 feet above the ground. And under instrument condition, although we had our co-pilot with good visual, we would be under the hood flying a radar at 200 or 300 feet.
And where did you do that kind of flying at?
In the Rockies, out of Wichita.
Wow. Boy, in the mountains, quite a bit of turbulence?
Oh, yeah, a lot. I used to have, and I probably still have, some of the movies that we did for that.
With the chase plane?
Yeah, and we had movies on board our airplane, too. But I have some really good movies, but I think my son has them now, of when I was investigating turbulence with the F-100, and I had a camera on my helmet looking out, and I had a camera where the gun position was on the airplane. So the film was in my son's garage, I think.
Why would you be involved with the F-100 when that's a North American airplane?
Because the Air Force funded a program to investigate turbulence.
Okay.
And we had, the Wichita Division had 3 F-100s, and I used to fly them a lot.
Okay. So you had the right fit for it.
Yeah.
So at what point did you decide to leave Wichita and get into commercial?
I think I mainly wanted to do that, to get into commercial. And it was I forget whether it was a 56 or something.
Probably, I was going to say probably a little bit later than that, probably the early 60s.
Yeah, it could have been. I don't know, my memory isn't very good.
Your memory's sensational. What was your first commercial project?
Well, I started as a production pilot when an airplane came out of the factory, and a guy like me would take it over and run it through a series of maneuvers to make sure everything worked, and that was the 707. So I flew that. Then the next models came out, the 727, 37, and 47. I flew all of those. It's been a good career for me, and I've done a lot of things that I never would have been able to do except working for the Boeing company and being in the Air Force. I remember when I met Lindbergh, and I was in the 747. We took the 747 back to New York to display it to the Pan American, and he was a executive with Pan Am, and my job was to be in the cockpit, and any of the executives came up there to explain things. This tall guy came up, and I didn't recognize him at first because my vision of Lindbergh was when he was about 27, 28 years old. He's now about 60. And this tall guy came in and he says, "Hi, my name's Charles Lindbergh." And he was real good. And he knew a lot about the airplane even then. Because my job was to not train, but to eliminate any confusion that people had about the airplane. And so I asked him, I said, "Is there anything in this cockpit that you'd like to know more about?" He said, "No, I know pretty well what it's all about."
Well, what a thrill for you.
Yeah.
When you think that was what got you started in the first place.
Yeah. He was my inspiration when he's 1927 when he flew the Atlantic.
Yeah. Oh, that's great.